Israel not just killing journalists in Gaza. In the West Bank, we're facing heightened incitement against Palestinian journalists who are being arrested, actually, at alarming rates by the Israeli army. Because here you can't just bomb Palestinians.
Hi, mijn naam is Rinke Verkerk en ik ben correspondent omstanders bij geweld. Een tijdje geleden sprak ik met Mariam Barghouti over het oplaaiende geweld en het falen van de internationale journalistiek op de Westelijke Jordaanoever.
Mariam en ik zijn bekenden van elkaar sinds ik er afgelopen maart was om verslag te doen van de situatie.
Vorige week keurde Israël een plan goed voor een nieuwe nederzetting die de Westelijke Jordaanoever in tweeën hakt. En daarom zetten we vandaag dit gesprek voort. Mariam, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me again.
How are you?
Okay.
Yeah?
Alive.
Yeah, that's already something. Yeah.
It's something.
Yeah. So talk to me about the E1 plan. What is it? How did they get it through the politically? How did they make it happen in the Israeli political sphere? And what does it mean on the ground in Palestine?
Right. So the E1 plan is part of Israel's broader strategy of settlement expansion. This isn't new. It's decades old and has been ongoing in the West Bank for decades, truly, since the 70s. And with the E1 plan right now, which has went through initial approval at the Israeli Knesset, is to connect the settlement of Ma'ali Adumim with the broader Jerusalem area. And what that means, it's going to cut off access of East Jerusalem and its capacity to expand with the Palestinian population there. And what it even does further is it dismembers the West Bank, right? It cuts it off, again, the center from the north and the center from the south. So Palestinians are not able to reach each other anymore. Instead, there are these settlements that are protected by the Israeli army and armed settlers as well. So life becomes even more dangerous for Palestinians to just visit each other or have access to each other or their own natural resources like water access or access to their farms and lands.
Yeah, because last time I was with you in March and we drove from Ramallah to the north, Jenin to Karem. I did a drive like that with you. There were many checkpoints. Oftentimes colleagues reported having, had to wait for hours at checkpoints. Would that become even more complicated, for example, now that this new settlement is being built or expanded?
Yeah, it's not just that it becomes even more complicated. There's a bigger detour, so constantly you see Palestinians, instead of just driving straight to the north or to the south, we have to constantly go through these different detours because of the Israeli settlements being there. Now it's even more dangerous now because we don't just have the Israeli military checkpoints. We have armed Israeli settlers constantly blocking roads, constantly attacking Palestinians in their own homes, carrying out arson attacks. So that's going to continue escalating as the Israeli government solidifies these settlements and continues to present them in this legal framework through approval of the Israeli Knesset, for example. So it emboldens the settlers as well.
And as you said, this settlement expansion is going on since the 70s. But I did get the sense from 3,000 kilometers away from you that this new settlement, it does feel like an escalation for Palestinians on the West Bank. It does feel like a next level annexation of the West Bank, a next level in the violence and the danger for Palestinians. Why is this different from all the other settlement expansion about which you also reported last time we spoke, which was already going at a crazy pace?
It's actually not very different. The only difference is that this one was reported on and it gained some media attention. But in fact, it's not the only project. You have areas, for example, in Ramallah, northwest, areas like Atara, which is on the outskirts of Ramallah, that was just declared a closed military zone, right?
Yeah.
Because Israeli settlers went on there and started declaring this outpost. Well, what the Israeli military did was first try to evacuate these settlers as the outpost, but then took even more land and just declared it a closed military zone. So now Palestinians don't have access to it. So the E1 plan, again, isn't any different or new. It just gained more media attention because it went through the legality measures of the Israeli Knesset, which shows you that the Israeli government and the settlers are not to be separated. It's all the same. It's all Israelis trying to take over more lands, some in the West Bank, others in areas like al-Fahm, which is the north, where Palestinians with Israeli citizenship live. So it's not new. It's just it was reported on more exhaustively than all the other plans.
And that's because this settlement is legalized.
Ma'ali Adumin is not, it's legalized in the Israeli framework, right? But it's still an illegal settlement in the West Bank. But what's different about this also is it targets the East Jerusalem area. So Israel's de facto denying any access for Palestinians to grow in Jerusalem or to have any potential of declaring it as the capital. And that's what they're doing. They're dismembering Palestinians and expanding in a very violent and ugly way.
Yeah, that's the dismembering. The word dismembering really captures it, because it's like a body that you cut into pieces, and the body still tries to function.
Yeah, it's truly cutting limb by limb for Palestinians. And that's what it does. It unbinds the people and their capacity to live collectively. Israel's crimes isn't just the murder of Palestinians, it's the murder of any sustainable capacity for them to live together, to live as families, to live as communities, with access to each other. So for Israel, it's this erasure format of Palestinians, right? And part of the erasure is erasing your capacity to speak together, to access each other, to relay stories and communicate with one another. And that's, it is essentially dismembering like a body.
Yeah. So how is Israel enforcing like the circumstances to be able to carry out these illegal activities? I mean, this is illegal under international law, what they're doing.
Yeah. It's illegal on every level. If you think about it morally or in international law, it doesn't make sense to anyone except someone with psychopathic tendencies, truly. And the way that Israel enforces or creates the environment to continue these practices is one, it ensures Palestinians don't have the capacity to fight back, right? The West Bank was demilitarized under the Oslo Accords, meaning the only official organized body with any access to arms is the Palestinian Authority, which is constantly collaborating with Israel. It's a proxy army for Israel. But also the security forces in the Palestinian Authority aren't trained in combat. They're trained in how to quell protests. So it's quelling Palestinians, really, not the capacity to fight back. And then in tandem to this, what Israel does is it continues to arm Israelis, right? Everywhere you walk, for example, in 48, you will see these Israelis with these M16s just at a cafe or in the hospitals. And likewise in the West Bank, we're seeing an increased presentation of armed Israelis just roaming everywhere, truly. They come to Ramallah. They go to cities in Nablus and again, carrying out arson attacks where they're burning people's homes and personal belongings. So that's how it creates. It ensures there's this disproportionate power, like an armed bully. And it goes full force in that vulnerability that Palestinians are in, especially because the international community refuses, and it's a refusal to take active measures on Israel, like an arms embargo, or actually holding consequences. They keep delaying consequences instead.
Can you also elaborate on what you see? So this explanation of how Israel locally enforces the circumstances in which to carry out these illegal activities. What do you see? What stands out to you about how Israel also enforces circumstances within the international community to be able to carry out illegal activities like this?
Yeah, that's on many folds. Israel exports its violence, right? The quelling of student protests is part of Israeli lobbying abroad, and this very sick and sinister pushing of the anti-Semitic argument instead of a recognition that that Israel is a violent force and a violent regime that is committing crimes in the name of Jewishness, right? So it weaponizes that history there. That's one way they push for international complicity. And then you look at the way Israeli officials speak to international media. It's so different than the way they speak in Hebrew media. right? When they're speaking to Israeli settlers in Hebrew, they're very much emboldening them to continue committing acts of violence. And then when they're speaking with English-speaking media, it's very like, oh, sorry, that was an accident, or no, Israel's trying to defend itself against these terrorists. They're two very different narratives, and it shows you this manipulation and, again, this manufacturing of consent that Israel has been working on for decades. And then more than this is, again, the lobbying that happens. There is real lobbying that happens with politicians and decision makers in order to continue pushing them to not take active measures against Israel. So this kind of international and diplomatic bullying also plays a huge role in why the international community continues in this refusal to take real actions against Israel.
Yeah. So then, the world, the outside the Western world, the international community also seems to kind of need Israel for certain things, seems to have interests in, shielding Israel while carrying out illegal activities. What to use look like the most, well, from a Palestinian perspective, look like the most damaging ways in which Israel is shielded and also aided by the international community, especially the West?
I mean, the relationships that the West has with Israel in terms of needing them is for weapons.
Yeah.
That's the major thing that Israel relies on. It relies on the exportation of weapons and calls it battle-tested when it's actually being used indiscriminately against civilian populations here. All these new weapons that they acquire to defend themselves are being used on real people who are a human laboratory for Israel. So this dependency on Israel for what? Weapons? Not worth it. Because in the end, Palestinians are paying a very heavy price. If they're not killed, they're being paralyzed by Israeli bombs and guns in the West Bank. You have Israeli soldiers constantly shooting Palestinian kids in the refugee camps in the knees or in the legs to cripple them on purpose. And again, this is a form of creating an even more vulnerable population that can't fight back. And this is an old policy from Yitzhak Rabin, who helped sign the Oslo Accords and peace process. But he said, break their bones. Don't kill them, but break their bones. And Israel continues on that policy. And again, the West adopts all these Israeli strategies and weapons for their own defense, which really is defending against what? They're the ones committing the crimes and the offenses on Palestinians. And again, Palestinians pay the price. Not only do we have to suffer these, the consequences of these weapons and this very violent regime and people, but we have to constantly be dehumanized in the international lens, right? Palestinians are perceived, quote unquote, as terrorists. Again, this was an engineered narrative that was pushed forward by Israel and was able to, take hold because of the colonial mentality that is embedded in the West. We are not just, again, dehumanized, but we must constantly fight for just the right to live freely, to not be shot in our own homes. So the consequences of, whatever the West sees as, we're dependent on Israel, is not worth it. Not for Palestinians, not for humanity. Because whatever is happening now creates precedent and paves the way for the future, for other places around the world as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you see international law just crumbling. I mean, it doesn't hold up. It's being violated every day. And so much comes together when we look at the murder of 6 journalists on Monday in Khan Yunis, 5 of whom were at the Nasser hospital complex and were bombed. And now Israel comes up with this explanation that it was an accident because they were targeting a Hamas camera.
Yeah.
So they bombed the hospital, civilian rescue workers near the surgical complex, 6 operating rooms, and 5 journalists for a Hamas camera. When you mentioned the dehumanization needed to be able to use weapons to kill Palestinians in such an excessive at such an excessive scale, I mean, I don't know. This is the most cynical example I could come up with. Even the camera.
It's emblematic that Israel thinks it's enough to say, "Oh, we just bombed the hospital because of a camera." Complete disregard that there's a bomb, that they have a bomb, right? Yes, it was twice, but because of a camera, and it goes back to the same justification that the world didn't take very lightly, or actually took very lightly. But when Israel killed Shireen Abu Akleh, this Palestinian journalist with American citizenship.
2022 it was?
2022, May 2022, in the West Bank, in Jenin, in the north. They shot her and killed her. And then one Israeli official said, well, a camera is like a gun. No, it's not. No, it is not. A bullet is not the same as taking a video of that bullet. But that was their justification, and that passed. Until now, there's no accountability for Shireen. And since then, we've had more than 240 journalists killed, right? And all of that happened in the last 21 months in Gaza. In Gaza, in 365 kilometers squared. That's how small Gaza is. Yeah. And they continue targeting these journalists by bombing them. And there is no uproar. We saw when our peer Anas al-Sharif was also killed.
2 weeks
Israel
ago.
had a hit list. Yes, and Israel had a hit list saying we will kill him. But again, there wasn't uproar, right? There was only uproar when he was killed. But then we had these other 5 journalists, and we don't see the uproar. People like Associated Press didn't even have the courtesy to name Mariam Abu Daqqa in their headline, right? Just a freelancer. And it shows you how disposable Palestinian life is.
And also the Israeli explanation, again, that it was a Hamas camera, was a headline that Reuters or Associated Press published. Literally just typed over and hit publish, and that was the headline.
Yeah, but what if it was a Hamas camera? What if it was?
No, let's
It doesn't make sense. Like, these arguments don't make sense, but the fact that Israel thinks this is an okay justification shows you, one, how they belittle international intelligence, but it also shows you how the Western world has taken these excuses and allowed them to continue. Right? Yeah. And then you have Israel not just killing journalists in Gaza. In the West Bank, we're facing heightened incitement against Palestinian journalists who are being arrested, actually, at alarming rates by the Israeli army. Because here, you can't just bomb Palestinians, right?
Why not? What's the difference between bombing a Palestinian? Because they did throw bombs in Jenin.
The airstruck,
and took on them. But it's different. Why can they not just bomb someone on the West Bank?
I mean, the areas like Tul Karam refugee camp and Jenin refugee camp, which were hit with Israeli airstrikes, are in the heart of, the Palestinian cities of Jenin and Tul Karam. But generally, overall, the West Bank is surrounded by Israeli settlers, right? They can't just bomb everyone because they can't, bomb the Israelis along with that. They can't risk that collateral damage. So that is why Israel won't, bomb us at the scale that they have in Gaza. So they take other measures instead, like arresting Palestinian journalists, shooting them, and injuring them and wounding them, continued judicial harassment of Palestinian journalists. We have seen many, especially in Jerusalem, who were forced on house arrest or continuously taken into Israeli interrogation and obstructed in their jobs. So they take other measures. But the point is to silence and to not get any documentation out, because international journalists refuse to cover. Again, they keep saying, let us into Gaza, let us into Gaza. Here's the West Bank. You are more than welcome to come cover Israeli crimes in the West Bank. But there's a refusal.
Yeah. Well, how does your life as a journalist on the West Bank look like then, with all these Israeli strategies to make your work very difficult and very little protection from international media, to back you up? What kind of measures do you have to take to do your job? And what risks do you have to accept before you even leave the door?
Truly, we pray. I think that's all we have. We just pray for our safety and we go, because there is no measure. You're wearing your flak jacket and helmet, but Israeli snipers can snipe you. They killed Shireen Abu Akleh in her gear. They shot her in the neck. They can shoot you in the thigh, hit, an important artery. So there isn't really any real measure, but what we do is we make it very clear that we're press. We wear our press insignia very clearly marked, because if they do end up hurting us or shooting us, let the world know that it was at a journalist, that there is that crime, that they can't claim anything other than. And that is the only measure that we take, truly, because there isn't any other. When we're in the field, we're amongst the people. We're covering with people and covering what's happening to people. But that means you're also at risk of getting tear gassed and shot and arrested, right?
Yeah. How does it feel that you wear all this gear so that the world can know that you were a journalist? And if they shoot you, and it is clear that they shot a journalist, you see how the world responds to that. Because it's...
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't do it for the response now anymore. I do it for the future. So the future can know how the world was and how their ancestors were. Because right now, in the current standing of the world, I don't see it showing up for the moment as the moment requires. And that is a failure. But sadly, that's always recognized in hindsight. So what we do, again, even when in our documentation, we're constantly asking ourselves, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Why are we constantly taking this risk? And it's so our people can be heard, for one, right? And for the future. So the future can not just know the story of Palestinians, but it gets to know the story of their own people based on the reactions or lack thereof that happened.
You want a mirror.
We're mirroring for them.
Yeah. Diagnosing,
truly diagnosing.
Yeah. So how does this fit into Israel's bigger strategy of its onslaught on Palestinians? It's going simultaneously. Gaza, the West Bank. Gaza is almost used as a cover for the onslaught on the West Bank. What's the bigger... How does the bigger strategy work? Like the practical side of it.
Right. So Gaza isn't just being used as a cover, right? Israel is taking advantage of the horror and the scale that it is inflicting there to continue the land annexation in the West Bank. But Gaza is also, and Israeli officials have constantly said this, it's so Palestinians don't ever think to fight back. It's being used as a lesson. Right. So even in the West Bank, you see people like the Palestinian Authority parroting the same Israeli discourse. They say, we don't want armed resistance because you saw what happened in Gaza. So Israel's using that to further pacify Palestinian capacity by creating this anticipated fear. So you just anticipate an Israeli response like that in Gaza, and you become too afraid to really do anything. And in the meantime, it is going full force in expanding its settlements in the West Bank. Again, Gaza is 365 kilometers squared. The West Bank is nearly 6,000.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's the prize. The prize for Israel is the West Bank. It has areas like the Jordan Valley, which is incredibly fertile in lands. So the way Israel is building this strategy is on multiple folds. The first is using Gaza as a lesson for all Palestinians. The second is continuing the settlement expansion. And the third, again, is manipulating the international community to either do nothing or continue delaying consequences. Yeah. But, on the long run, what that looks like is our lands are being taken over. I don't recognize the West Bank anymore. Truly, every other week, if I'm going on the field to cover, I don't recognize the roads. I get lost more often. Because there's another settlement here. And it's dangerous.
That's
it's
really
so dangerous
if you stumble upon a road. Yeah.
I'm actually terrified because with Israeli settlers, you really don't know what they'll do. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, they destroyed the CNN car. And that's an Israeli plated car, right? So they hit their windshield and broke that. So it's actually terrifying.
Yeah. You already addressed this in many ways, but I'm going to ask it anyway. It might look like this aggression and this lawlessness and also the international complicity is only hurting the Palestinian people. But from where you stand as a Palestinian journalist, how do you see this changing the outer world outside of Palestine?
It did change the outer world. That's it. What happened has happened. The world has changed forever. the fact that there is a regime in 2025 that is able to drop more bombs than 3 nuclear bombs in a single place, with the world not being able to do anything about it, is telling of where the world is. So the world is going to have a reckoning with itself and its positionality in the world, and how we are able to protect each other and our willingness to protect each other. So the world is changed. And I think that even if it is going to be in hindsight, people are going to wake up to the horror that has happened, because the international community doesn't even know a glimpse of what has happened, either in the West Bank, but especially in Gaza. Especially in Gaza. There's only a glimpse of it. They're going to wake up to this horror show and realize, and they're going to ask themselves, how did we let this happen? But differently than in history, right now you have a plethora of information and testimonies of Palestinians naming exactly how this has been allowed to happen. And I think that's going to change the world I hope and I believe in a more positive direction for change, right? And it's going to have a reckoning with the international law that it has set in place, again, at the same time that Israel was formed. That's when international law came, right? It had its opportunity to be tested then, but it refused, so it shows you its failure. And I think we're going to have a new change in government systems. Why do we have representatives that don't represent the people? Because a large, portion of global communities are against this.
Yeah.
Period. Yet representatives aren't taking the action to represent that demand. So we're going to have, again, a reckoning with governance systems as well. I think the world has changed. It's just catching up and, doesn't have the time to process and reflect on where or what direction they want that change to go.
I wonder if you have any thoughts on this, but if I take it to the Netherlands, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Caspar Veldkamp, just resigned after a furious debate in which opposition parties attacked him for not sanctioning Israel, not taking any measures to try and stop. I mean, the Netherlands has a powerful position because we are the biggest investor in Israel. Europe is Israel's biggest investor worldwide, and the Netherlands covers 2/3 of those investments. Also, we are the biggest recipient of Israeli investments. So we have a position of power, and yet our leading politicians don't use that power to sanction Israel or do anything. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs resigned. He said he wanted to take sanctions, but his fellow, parties in the cabinet refused. Now his employees at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs say that's not true at all. They're leaking to the press that he was not willing to do anything. How do you look at that? Like, we're without a Minister of Foreign Affairs. It's not a disaster, but it's almost a comedy, maybe is a better word, over the refusal to take action, whereas we've had the biggest protests in the Netherlands in 20 years over the government's unwillingness to take action.
I mean, good riddance. I think that's good riddance, bye. But it does pose, a question that who is he representing? And then again, if it's this fear about the investments, where's the belief in people in the Netherlands and being able to locally grow together? Why is this dependency on Israel? Again, it's so belittling to your own people on one end. And on the other, it really shows you the power of Israeli lobbying. But also, the foreign minister could just be, a racist foreign minister as well. Didn't need lobbying, just aligns with the Israeli regime. And again, good riddance. And I think it's on the people of the Netherlands now to, select a representative power, or a system of selecting a representative power which aligns with the values that they want, right? Because in that regards, at least we're able to judge better. So because right now, as Palestinians, we refuse to judge global communities because we separate them from their representatives. We say, no, it's not the people, they're not the psychopathic. But if your representatives actually, in fact, align with your values, then yeah, there is a blame to cast and accountability to hold on everyone, right? But up until now, we're separating them.
Yeah. And if we then look at how systems of violence work and how violence in the end always destroys itself, and it's a matter of how many it takes with it, do you think this E1 escalation, which is mostly escalated in the press, not on the ground, because the ground has been so escalating anyway, is this part of it? Is this part of the final chapter of this Israeli onslaught on Palestinian people, and also, internationally, it's part of a broader trend, I think, that we also see occur in the States, in extreme right-wing political tendencies in Europe. Is this like part of the final chapter, or do you feel like it also could be part of, I don't know, some ending of what Palestinian people could be? How do you feel? It's a hard question for me to ask. But
And it's a good question, because I can be a romantic and say, yeah, this is the end, it's the fall of Israel. But it could also, again, be the end of Palestinians. And it hinges on how both Palestinians and the international community respond, right? If Israel is going to continue to be armed, if Israeli settlers are going to be treated normally rather than problematized globally, then yeah, this could be the end of Palestinians. We're heavily weakened here. We don't have any capacity to fight back. Armed resistance groups have been near obliterated by Israel. Not that armed resistance ended, just those organized groups, right? And that capacity. And political organized capacity here is also, weakened by Israel as well as the Palestinian Authority. You can't go out and just protest anymore, because you can get shot by the Israeli army right now. It's not just tear gas. You will get shot by them, or again, armed Israelis in these settlements in the West Bank. So it really hinges on how the international community responds. That it is a battle of frontier, and one of the last battles in this era and history. I do see it as that, yes. How it will go, I can't predict the future, but I can tell you, if the international community remains as it is, then we are looking at a massacre of Palestinians. That is a massacre of a people. And that blood is on their hands, 100%. It is on their hands. Palestinians have tried everything to fight back. They've tried armed resistance, they've tried unarmed resistance, they've tried diplomacy, they tried boycotting, again, which is the most peaceful form you can do, and that was criminalized. And at every juncture, Palestinians were turned into the villains. So the blood is on the world's hands.
Where do you stand if looking at the stakes and the options that you have? What's the position you've chosen for yourself?
In what regards?
Well, what will you do, regardless of what the international community does? What's your choice that you've made?
I think it's not a choice you make. It's every day you make a choice. And every day it is hard, because sometimes you want to ask, do I stay I'm someone that's privileged, right? I have dual citizenship. Do you stay? Do you go? Do you leave your people behind? No, you can't do that. And every day, you choose the right thing to do. And that is what you can. In my case, journalism. I can continue documenting, and I can continue appealing to the people in the world that are willing to listen, to bring about change. And it's a constant choosing that. And it is a hard choice, right? Because there is a lot to risk. And Palestinians aren't fearless. We're not robots. We're not these, super brave people. We're constantly afraid. And we want to live. And we don't want to keep fighting back. We just, we want to live. It's that simple. And we're constantly denied that. And then at the same time, we're constantly turned into these superheroes. We don't want to be superheroes. I just want to be an average 30-something-year-old woman making so many mistakes in her life and trying to learn from them normally, right? Yeah.
And I have one more question, Mark. I don't know if we would include it, and I don't know if you want to answer it, but, for me, to be honest, it's I have to say that for me, without October 7th, I wouldn't be, as a journalist, on this road of, analyzing this whole system of occupation and oppression that strangles the Palestinian people. And so it's a painful insight that I personally needed October 7th to force my eye on the situation and my attention.
Yeah.
I also see, and I mean, many Palestinian people have said this in different words, but the biggest thing for Palestinians on October 7th was the fall of the wall, like the breaking of the wall that had been imprisoning them, right? This feeling that it was breaking down, and it felt like the beginning of a new era. Because in the imagination of the Palestinian people, the idea that this wall could be taken down had vanished. It was sort of permanent in the imagination of the Palestinian people, and it went down. And now it's come at the point where either this breaking of the wall will also mark the end, maybe in a faster way than it would have come without October 7th, or it might be the breakthrough. How do you feel? It's almost 2 years later.
Okay, I don't think it was October 7th that you needed. Let's clarify, it was everything that came after. It was Israel's 21 months. It was Israel's response. And it was definitely triggered by Palestinians fighting back. Now, before October 7th, you had September 2021, where 6 Palestinians broke out of Jilbour prison,
They dug
Israel's
a tunnel.
high security prison. Yes, they broke out. One of them was Zakaria Zbeidi, who was released in the ceasefire deal back November.
Yeah.
So that showed Palestinians like, oh, we can break free, It was a very Shawshank Redemption moment in real life. And it instilled hope. And again, October 7th, I remember when I saw Ere's wall just ruptured open. And I've been to Gaza and I've been through it's so dystopian and so ugly. But my first response was Gaza broke out of prison, because it was a prison. It was an open air prison, and Israel was planning on killing Palestinians in Gaza regardless. And it is because Hamas is there, and it's one of the few groups that chose to fight back against Israel, because honestly, there is no other option. They're living in an open air prison. And I think what October 7th did is it reinstilled hope in Palestinians, in that you can always push back against the bully. It was like that moment where, the wimpy kid just had their one jab at the bully. And of course, then the bully came and just jumped the kid. But it really showed Israel's ferocity, and it exposed what Israel is to the world. We all knew this. Everyone after October 7th, every Palestinian, asked them. They would say, we knew we were all, our first response was, we're all going to die. We're all going to be killed. We knew that. I don't think we knew that the international community would be so disgustingly complicit. They kept justifying the killings, and they drew the line at famine. It was famine, right? It wasn't the bombs upon bombs upon bombs. It was, we can't starve them. We can bomb them. And, that's what we didn't expect, for the world to be so crappy.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that. We'll have to have a reckoning with that.
So not just Israel's ferocity is exposed, but the bigger system in which this ferocity has come to existence and is maintained and emboldened and shielded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Israel doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It is not its own solo soldier. It comes, again, as part of this broader system.
Yeah. Thanks, Mar.
Thank you.
Vond je dit een interessante video en wil je meer van dit soort video's mogelijk maken? Word dan lid van de Correspondent.